February 2024, I stopped all 6 of my medications. Statins I'd been on for 11 years, ezetimibe 3 years, allopurinol for gout 20 years, 2 asthma inhalers I'd had since 1978, and an antihistamine I'd taken daily for decades. Stopped all of them and I waited to see what would break. Nothing broke, my cholesterol didn't spike, the gout didn't come back, I didn't have a single asthma attack, and 15 months later, my GP looked at my blood results and said they were the best readings in 13 years of records. That's not what I was told would happen. Tim Spector, who has looked at long-term medication outcomes, points to the mechanism that explains why it did. I'll get to that, but first I want to show you the data. I'm Neil, 13 years of NHS blood tests in a folder on my desk, and I've been off all medication since February 2024. I want to be straight with you. I am not telling you to do what I did. The decision I made was mine. I made it alone, and it was not a template. What I am telling you is that the 15 months of blood data that followed that decision exist, and what they showed is worth seeing. In the next 15 minutes, we're going to cover the full arc. First, each of the 6 medications, what they were for, how long I'd been on them, and what my blood markers looked like at the point I stopped. Then what happened in the month after? Month 1, 6, month 11, month 15. The timeline is not what I expected, and the data at month 11 is the part that changed how I think about what the system was doing. Then the mechanism, why the body responds the way it does when the inputs change. If you're on multiple medications and you've ever quietly wondered whether this is just what the rest of your life looks like, this data is for you to make up your own mind with. We start with February 2024 and a pill organiser that was empty for the first time in over a decade. The medication story in this country runs like this. Your cholesterol is too high, here are statins. Your uric acid is elevated, here's allopurinol. Your airway is inflamed, here's a preventive inhaler. Here's a reliever. Your histamine response is overactive, here's citrazine. 5 separate problems, 5 separate prescriptions. Each one handed to me by a GP doing exactly what the guidelines said. What the guidelines didn't say, and what took me a decade to piece together, is that those 5 problems might not be 5 separate things. Tim Spector has been researching the relationship between diet, gut health, and systematic health for decades. His Zoe research pulls from one of the largest nutritional databases in the world. On statins specifically, he said something that properly landed for me. The research suggests statins' main benefit doesn't actually come from lowering cholesterol. It comes from the anti-inflammatory action on blood vessel walls. The cholesterol lowering part, which is what they're prescribed for, may have been a red herring all along. A 2014 analysis of 21 observational studies covering 347,000 people found no association between saturated fat in the diet and subsequent heart disease or stroke. I want to be clear about what that does and doesn't mean. It doesn't mean cholesterol doesn't matter. It means total cholesterol as a single number is a much cruder tool than it's been treated as. And it means that if statins are helping, inflammation is probably the reason, not cholesterol reduction. Which brings me to what I think is the most important number in my entire 13 years of blood tests. Not LDL, not total cholesterol, CRP, C-reactive protein, the inflammation marker. Another large US study, 30 years of data, found inflammation twice as important as cholesterol for predicting long-term health outcomes. Twice. Think about that in relation to a standard GP appointment. Cholesterol checked every time. CRP, often not even on the form. Now let's talk about what cholesterol actually is, because most people leave the GP surgery with a total number and no idea what it means. Think of LDL, cholesterol, as a delivery driver. Its job is to carry fat-soluble nutrients around the body. Essential work. But LDL is the delivery driver that occasionally drops parcels at the wrong address, specifically inside your arterial walls where they accumulate. HDL is the returns driver. It picks up the misdelivered parcels and takes them back to the liver to be processed properly. You want fewer wrong address deliveries and more returns. That's the simplified version of why the LDL to HDL ratio matters more than the total number. The Framingham Heart Study, one of the longest running cardiovascular studies in the world, found that HDL had the largest impact on heart disease risk of all the lipoproteins measured. Not LDL, HDL. My total cholesterol was 8 in December 2023. That's the number that looked bad on paper. But what the paper didn't show was that I'd been on statins for 11 years at that point, and my cholesterol had risen from 7.5 when I started. The medication that was meant to lower it had presided over a 6.7% worsening. Meanwhile, my HDL was sitting at 1.3. That's the number that should have been getting more attention. Jesse Inshert, biochemist, worked at Georgetown, makes the point clearly. It's not total LDL, but specifically the pattern of LDL particles and CRP that drive cardiovascular events. Half of heart attack victims have entirely normal cholesterol levels. Statins lower one type of LDL particle, the relative, harmless, large, fluffy type, but don't significantly affect the small, dense pattern that causes the real damage. I'm not saying that to alarm anyone. I'm saying it because that understanding is what changed how I thought about what my medication was and wasn't doing. It was managing a marker. It wasn't fixing the system that was producing the problem. The second mechanism worth understanding is inflammation. Not the sharp, purposeful kind, the inflammation that fires when you sprain an ankle and stands down in a week, the chronic, low-grade kind that never gets the stand-down signal. Think of it like a lorry on a motorway with failed brakes. The engine started fine, it was doing what it was supposed to do. But something's wrong with the off switch. The lorry's still moving. The damage isn't from starting, it's from not being able to stop. That's chronic low-grade inflammation. The body fires the response, and for reasons rooted in food, sleep, metabolic dysfunction and gut health, it doesn't resolve. Conditions like gout, asthma, allergic response, fatty liver, insulin resistance, they're not separate diseases, they're different expressions of the same runaway lorry. This matters whether you've been given a diagnosis or not. The mechanism runs for years before it produces a label. Understanding it now gives you more options than understanding it at the point a GP finally puts a name on it. Eric Rim at Harvard put together data from studies following people across decades. His finding, making genuine lifestyle changes in your 40s or 50s can roughly halve your risk of heart disease, even after decades of doing the wrong thing. The body's capacity for repair, even at that stage, is not small. It's not a guarantee, it's not a promise, but it's the trajectory that my blood tests, somewhat to my surprise, have actually showed. A common misconception I want to address before we get into my data. People assume that if you're on long-term medication, coming off it is inherently dangerous. The medication is keeping you stable. Take it away and things collapse. That model assumes the medication was fixing something. In my case, and I can only speak to my case, what it was doing was holding back a symptom while the underlying condition quietly worsened. My cholesterol got worse on statins. My gout was still requiring prescription strength management after 20 years. My HbA1c kept creeping towards diabetic range, despite me following the standard advice. Stable and improving turned out to be two very different things. I want to give you the timeline properly because the shape of it matters. Reviewing 14 months of blood tests side by side, I noticed three distinct phases. I didn't see them at the time. I only spotted the pattern in hindsight. Month 1, relief. February 2024, I stopped all medications. 1 month later, total cholesterol 7, down from 8. While I was on statins, I had to check the printout twice. LDL was improving. Kidney function, excellent. And the number that surprised me most, ALT, my liver enzyme, dropped from 69 to 28 in 30 days. The normal range is under 40. I'd been above that range on statins for who knows how long. 1 month off. 1 month of 18/6, which averaged 17/7 fasting, gave my liver a rest from processing medication. And it dropped 59%. The body, when you stop overwhelming it, starts exhaling. That's the only way I can describe month 1. Month 11, reversal. January 2025, HbA1c was 40. Normal range in December 2023 it had been 47. Solidly pre-diabetic. I'd spent years watching that number creep upwards despite being on medication, despite doing what I was told. 11 months off all medication, 11 months of consistent 17/7 fasting and non-UPF eating, and 3 that year, 2 10 days and a 17-day water fast. And it had reversed, not managed, reversed. That was the month I stopped thinking about what I'd stopped and started thinking about what the inputs had actually been doing all along. April 2025, HbA1c 37, the lowest reading in my 13-year dataset. LDL 3.8, down from 5.6, off medication baseline. Cholesterol, HDL ratio 4.7, within target for the first time in years. And the CRP number, January 2025, CRP was 6.2, technically in the normal range, but sitting in the upper half of it. April 2025, 1, an 84% reduction in 3 months. That CRP number is the one I keep coming back to. 6 medications for conditions that all have inflammation as a common thread. Gout, asthma, allergic response, cardiovascular risk, metabolic dysfunction, and the marker that measures systematic inflammation had dropped to near zero without a single drug for 14 months. What's interesting about that pattern is that it shows up in data well before symptoms resolve. I can see in my blood test going back years the inflammation that was driving all of it, running in the background before any of it had a name. The gout sensation deserves its own moment. 20 years on allopurinol. I'd been told my uric acid would always be elevated without medication, that managing it with a daily pill was just how it was going to be. My first summer off the medication, I ate a massive ribeye steak at a client dinner and went home fully expecting the ankle to blow up. Woke up fine. 3 days later, still fine. Not because red meat had magically stopped affecting uric acid, but because when you fix insulin resistance and gut inflammation, the body regulates uric acid differently. The trigger food wasn't the problem. The system the food was landing in was the problem. Fix the system and the trigger stops triggering. There were struggles. I want to be honest about that. Month 11 to 14, my ferritin was dropping, iron levels declining. I assumed it was the fasting, the reduced volume. Partly true, but the actual cause, my GP investigated it, it was bleeding piles. Chronic blood loss over months, nothing to do with the eating window, got treated, problem was addressed. The other honest thing, my triglycerides at month 14 were 4.3, elevated. They'd been 2.3 at month 1. I don't have a clean explanation for that yet. Possibly the timing relative to recent extended fasting. Possibly dietary composition. Possibly lab variation. I'm tracking it. One abnormal marker doesn't erase the trajectory, but it also doesn't get ignored. That's the deal you make when you choose data over dogma. April 25, GP appointment. He opened the file, looked at the numbers. LDL down 32% from when I first came off statins. The HbA1c, 37. The CRP, 1. The ALT at its lowest in 13 years. He paused and he asked, "You back on statins?" I shook my head. He scrolled through it all again. This is way better than when you were on medication. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I've been off all 6 medications for coming on 23 months now. I haven't restarted one. 6 medications, statins, gout pills, asthma inhalers, allergy tablets locked. I stopped all of them in 2024. Not because a YouTuber told me to, but because my blood test told me the inputs were working. If documenting that kind of thing properly sounds worth following, please subscribe. If I was starting this from scratch, not the stopping medication part, I'm not recommending that, but the data side of it, the thing I'd have done earlier is ask my GP for a CRP test. Standard blood panel, cholesterol, HbA1c, liver function, kidney function. CRP is often not on the standard request. But if Tim Spector is right that inflammation is twice as important as cholesterol for predicting long-term health outcomes, it seems like a reasonable thing to know. Ask for it at your next review. If it's above 3, that's a conversation worth having. Not about cholesterol, about inflammation. The second thing I'd have done earlier, look at the direction of my numbers over years, not individual readings. My cholesterol wasn't just elevated, it was consistently worsening on medication that was supposed to be controlling it. My HbA1c was creeping upwards, slowly but clearly. The trend was telling a story that individual appointments weren't surfacing. If you've had multiple blood tests over years, ask your GP to print the history. The trajectory matters more than any single reading. Why'd have started practically? 18-6 fasting. 18 hours eating window, 16 hours without food, consistently for 8 weeks. As I say, my average was 17-7. And see if anything meaningful in blood markers. That's the intervention that moved almost everything in my data. Not the extended fast, not the supplements, not any particular food, the window. Start simply, maintained it consistently. The timeline I'd say is this. Month 1, you're looking for liver and kidney comfort, not weight loss, not dramatic change, just the body settling. Month 3, you run your first blood test, HbA1c, fasting, glucose, CRP, if your GP will include it. That's your baseline from the new inputs. Month 6, you look for a direction, not a transformation, a direction. Month 11, if the direction is held, is when you start to see metabolic state changes, or that's when I did, not before. I want to fix this without being on the tablets for the rest of my life. I've heard that from so many people who found this. I said something very like it myself. I'm not saying that's achievable for everyone. I'm saying the data suggests the body has more capacity to regulate its own systems than we've been told. When you change what you're asking it to work with, if you're currently on medication, particularly diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, or statins, please do not stop anything without talking to your GP. I've built a blood test tracker. It pulls together all the markers that actually tell the story over time. HbA1c trend, fasting glucose, CRP, liver enzymes, cholesterol ratio. Not for one appointment, for the ARC. 13 years of my own data went into the layout. It's free, links in the description. And remember, this is educational content, it's not medical advice. Do not stop any prescription medication without speaking to your GP first. What I've shared today is one person's documented experience. Your data will be different. Your starting point will be different.